Welcome to Beyond Belief. I'm George Norrie. This is going to be perhaps one of the most important programs you have ever witnessed, because this has to do with your livelihood and the livelihood of your family. With us today is Michael Maloof. He is the author of A Nation Forsaken. This is probably one of the most important books I have read that has to do with our power grid and the possibilities of it going down because of two things: an EMP attack, an electromagnetic pulse attack from a country that detonates a nuke in the atmosphere, or a major X-flare from the sun. And if you say that can't happen, it's already happened before. We were just lucky in the 1800s not to have had a lot of power or electricity. We did have the telegraph, and that went out.
EMP is an electromagnetic pulse, is a high intensity particles which can flare off and come at such a rapid rate of speed and at such an acceleration that they interfere with our magnetic poles, with our north pole. And as a consequence, it also, because they're so powerful and highly charged, they can wipe out any unprotected electronics. That would include our grid, which is highly vulnerable already. We put so much demand on that on that grid today that it's basically on overload. We upgrade it, but in doing that, we're not. It's basically a jury-rigged system. And in addition to that, our electronics, our microchips have become much more sophisticated, much more delicate, and as a consequence, such a pulse can absolutely knock out that electronics. Our automated control systems, from running the gas pump to ATMs, absolutely. The automatic systems for our pipelines. We have more than 1 million miles of pipelines, oil and gas pipelines. An EMP can trigger those automatic systems so that it builds up pressure from the natural gas, can cause explosions. There's actually been instances of that in isolated cases.
Sure.
Oil pipelines, fires can develop. But if this were to happen with an EMP event from a flare or a high altitude nuclear explosion, it would cover a far greater geographical area. Half the country, the full country, depending upon how severe the EMP was. And it could take months, years to come back on. By then, we will have had affected about 90% of the U.S. population. Dead. From starvation, from disease, no water, medical reasons. And your urban centers could be wiped out as a consequence. You would have secondary problems emerging, such as disease, lack of sanitation problems, and rioting, as you point out. Just in the case of natural events such as hurricanes and heavy storms, flooding, our grocery stores, for example, have maybe 3 days of groceries at most. They'll be wiped out in hours.
Yeah.
All industrialized countries in the world would have been affected. The U.S. the most, because we rely the most on our technology.
Exactly.
It has made us the greatest industrial power in the world as we are today. However, it's also our Achilles heel. I have a few years of experience with the federal government, and we began to see countries in the work that I did that were developing and acquiring the means of delivery systems or missiles, and developing a nuclear weapons capability. We also saw testing that told us it was less for destruction, but more to develop more of a gamma ray type of emission of these nuclear devices. Low kilotonnage, but high emission of gamma rays. Gamma rays is one form of electromagnetic energy. Other forms would be microwaves, such as off of your radar systems. And even on a lower basis, we have lone wolves, if you will, that are out there today, could actually take surplus radar systems, point it directly at buildings and fry electronics.
Exactly. And I think they've done that.
Yes, they have. And the Russians actually have had some experiences with that. People will go in and rob some jewelry stores, and they've actually used that device to incapacitate any alarm systems.
Jeez. How high up does that detonation have to occur, Michael?
Well, it can occur from about 35 kilometers, or about 50 miles up to about 300 miles. The higher the level, the greater the coverage, and dependent upon the kilotonnage, it will determine what electronics are knocked out and where. For example, if you detonate a device, let's say over the Washington Boston corridor at, let's say, at about 50 miles, that will be the most affected area. You're hitting the eastern grid. We have 3 grids: eastern, western, Texas. Eastern grid, but they're all connected. But there would be that ripple effect that would affect them all as a consequence. But the most severe damage would be the eastern grid, as in this example. The eastern grid alone services 70% of the U.S. population. It would be devastating. North Korea is one of the countries that I'm extremely concerned about right now. They have shown examples of not only missile testing. Their missile testing has actually been more toward the South Pole. As a consequence, we really don't have missile defenses along our southern coast as we should. Most of ours are located pointed toward the North Pole.
Right.
So and we've seen in some of their testing where they've actually orbited a satellite. That satellite, at about 150, 200 miles up, could be a nuclear device. And we know they've been testing, and they have actually threatened us. And they can actually detonate on command anywhere in the world as a consequence. So as a consequence, you have North Korea with this international capability all of a sudden because of this satellite. Yeah. And we have Aegis systems in cooperation with Japan, but you don't know if it's a test. You don't want to be shooting every missile.
Clearly, you can't do that.
You can't do that. So this is why we hold our breaths every time they do a missile test.
Are countries concerned about this?
Oh yeah, they're very concerned about it. Certainly all the industrialized countries are. And I would add that North Korea, every time they do a nuclear test, underground nuclear test with low kilotonnage but high gamma rays, that's what some of our results have shown. The North Koreans openly threaten the United States with a nuclear attack.
전쟁의 아성이 원자탄의 타격권에 들었다. 이는 절대로 기회를 놓치지 않을 것이다. 백두산 대국의 선택은 최후의 총대결산, 서국 통일 대성전의 불가락이다. 김정은 장군 명령만 내리신다면 최우승의 축포성 천하에 터치리.
And they just did it a few weeks ago, saying they wanted to nuke the White House. They've actually released videos showing nuclear explosions over the Capitol building and over Washington, over New York City. And they do it in a very professional video format, and it tells us that they have something going for them. People think that the utilities are capable of protecting against such a development. No, they cannot, and especially over a widespread area. And they also think that it's just a cover so that the conservatives can build missile defense systems throughout the United States. The reality is we're not defended adequately, and the only thing that we have going for us are these Aegis systems, which we're actually deploying in Europe right now, and which has upset the Russians. But the Aegis system is effective up to, as I said, 150 miles. Now, if they went ahead and launched a satellite 200, 250 miles with a nuclear device in it, then it would pose a very serious problem for us.
How do you know who's doing it?
You won't. Tragedy of it all is that it's all fixable.
I'm amazed, Michael, it hasn't happened yet.
Yes, and that's why we've joined with you to try and make it happen with legislation. The federal government has known about the impact of an EMP for well over 50 years.
It is criminal for them not to fix the grid system.
I agree.
We're estimating $1 to $4 billion to fix the grid,
about $2 billion.
Insulate it. That's nothing. I call it chump change.
It is.
In
today's terms, it is.
So let's look at a scenario. We fix the grid system. We insulate it. Someone still tries to detonate a nuke in the atmosphere. What happens? Nothing?
Something will happen, because you're going to be insulating and preparing and hardening the most critical of your infrastructures, your life-sustaining infrastructures. Your grid, certainly.
It's not a devastation.
It's not a devastation. You'll mitigate the problem. You won't knock it out you won't eliminate it entirely. But at least you'll have something. You'll be able to still have communications. You'll still be able to probably have electricity, be able to function. Your emergency services.
Your phones will still work.
They
things
could,
like that.
yeah, if they're hardened. If everything is hardened. Right now, this minute, it will just knock out your telecommunications systems
Right.
completely,
People
as
can't-
well as the satellites.
People can't text, they'll go crazy.
Well, I know. It's
But if we do insulate it and spend the money, at least we have a nation that can fight back.
Yes, it will mitigate one serious flaw in our national security. It was the Russians actually who got us to focus on this to focus on this problem in the early 80s.
Are they trying to insulate their grid?
They have. They're doing it now.
They are.
Yeah. Any country. What I've discovered is that any country
Amazing.
that has had experienced warfare on its soil knows about EMP and is doing something about it. The Israelis, the Chinese, in the U.S. If we had, let's say, at the the president with his pen and phone, for example, with an executive order, could order the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, immediately to declare
Implement this right now.
Right now, because right now
Executive order.
EMP is not one of its 15 national planning scenarios. With the stroke of a pen, he can make it and order it done because of this threat. And what the problem is that because DHS hasn't done it, our emergency services at the state and local levels that take DHS's cue on how to prepare for disasters is not doing it either.
What if, here's my conspiratorial mind here, Michael.
Okay.
What if they want this to happen? What if the reason they haven't moved ahead to do what is probably the most obvious thing I've ever seen, and that's fix the grid because we're relying on electricity. What if they want this to happen? To
What would be
crush the nation?
Why would they want to crush the nation?
Well, let's assume we got these one world government fanatics that think, you know what? Let's just get into the club, but we have to do it by breaking down the United States. Let's eliminate the population. We want population control. And let's just let this happen at one time.
Well, if you wanted to carry it to that extreme, I guess that's
why
possible.
else would you not do this?
Right. Well, I think that this is more and more people are coming around to that general thinking. Just from the comments that I receive from my articles at WND on this, more and more people are expressing that concern now. Why hasn't it been done?